Welcome to How to Plant-Based, where we teach you how to use and create plant-based basics. Today is episode 3, where we show you how to make perfect nut butter every single time, as well as a little bonus. So let's go. So the first step you have to do when you are making any type of nut butter is choose a nut. And we know that oftentimes people are going to think of peanuts for peanut butter, or maybe even some almonds for an almond butter. And lastly, maybe some cashews, but you don't have to stop at just those things. You could use walnuts or even some pecans. You can use macadamia nuts, any type of nut, pistachio that you can think of, you can turn into a nut butter. You can even use a combination of different ones to make your own creation. If you have an allergy to nut, you can also do all of this exactly the same with sunflower seeds. Also, if you are looking for something like that and to get a sun butter. If you have been around Make It Dairy Free for a little while, you know that I particularly like to do things as fast as possible. I am a mom, I run my own business, so I don't have a lot of time like many of you, and so I like to get things done as fast as possible. I do not roast my nuts prior to putting them into a blender to blend. But some people like to do that. What I prefer to do is get something that has already been roasted or dry roasted, but things like almonds or even walnuts, I just use raw. If you are doing cashews, I prefer not to have raw cashews. So again, like a one that has already been roasted. My preference is also to get anything that has not been salted, especially with peanuts. If you get a salted peanut, it typically contains a lot of salt. So I prefer to get unsalted peanuts, and then you can adjust the salt when you're blending to your own taste. If you are wanting to roast those, you're gonna do it at 350 degrees for about 10 minutes. It's basically just warming them, and then you have to let them cool completely before you toss them into a blender. What that does help do is it softens them a little bit and allows the nuts to release their oils, which helps them blend a little bit easier. But I find if you're using the right type of equipment that it really doesn't cut down on the time very much. And so again, trying to save myself time, I skip that step entirely. Now for step 2, you are going to want to pick what you are actually going to blend your nuts in once you have chosen which nut or nut combination you are going to use to make your nut butter. 2 of the most popular options are either a blender or a food processor. Pretty much every video that you can find on YouTube uses a food processor, but it is not my first choice, and I'm going to tell you why. So a food processor is easier to clean. However, it takes much longer to blend. You have to do a lot of taking the top off of it and scraping down the sides, and then continue to work it a lot. You also have to make sure that you have a specific amount, at least a cup, usually more like a cup and a half to 2 cups of nuts inside of your food processor in order for the blades to hit and continue to spin, making your nut butter. What I find is easier with a blender is, one, you don't have to have a specific amount. You do technically need like at least 1/4 of a cup or a 1/2 cup, but I don't know anybody that's going to spend time making a nut butter and not use at least that much. So you don't need quite as much as you do with a food processor, and it goes much faster. You can get peanut butter, but any nut butter that you can get under 2 minutes inside of a high speed blender. It is harder to clean up though, so that is the con, and that's because the walls with the food processor are all smooth. Whereas the walls with most blenders, they go in. And so it makes it harder to clean up. But again, it's really not that hard. A little tip for you is that if you boil some water and put into your blender and then blend, it will help release those oils inside of the nuts for anything that is left over. And then I'm also going to show you a little tip later of what my favorite way is to get it clean and get an extra little goodie for your house. So you want to pick one of these 2. My biggest tip is that you want to choose something that is high speed, whether it is a blender or a food processor. Unfortunately, you can't use something that doesn't have a lot of power because you are going to run up your motor and it's going to cause it to overheat, which is either going to cause it not to work or make you have to wait until it cools back down until that you can use it again. So my top pick is a Vitamix. It pretty much pulverizes anything that you can put into it. We do know that it costs a lot of money though, so it is not an option for everyone. But we did want to show you, we have done a review on the NutriBullet Smart Touch blender, which is under $200. We have had this thing for two and a half years now, and it does almost just as well as the Vitamix, but again, coming much closer to a price point that a lot more people can afford if they are able to, and you know, still get you a great nut butter or anything else that you want to make inside of your blender. The other option is a food processor. Again, you want to have something that has a lot of power. This particular one is a Hamilton Beach, and it is an 8-cup food processor. You don't need quite one that is that big, but again, you just want to make sure that it has the power. So pick which one you want for the pros and the cons, and then we can start making our nut butter. Okay, and now once you have whichever thing you are going to use, you are going to blend them up. So I have a pound of dry roasted peanuts here. That is literally the only ingredient that we are going to start with. A pound of nuts gets you approximately 16 ounces or 2 cups of nut butter once it is finalized. So roughly 3.5 cups will turn into about 2 cups of nut butter. So literally the only thing that we are going to do is drop these into our blender or food processor. One quick tip that I want to give is you should make sure that this is dry at the bottom, especially if you're using anything other than peanuts. Peanuts seem to release much quicker the oils and things to make them turn into a nut butter, but if you're using something like a walnut, it turns into more of a flour first, and so if it gets wet at the bottom, it makes it much harder to actually turn into a nut butter. So make sure whatever you are using, you get it dry at the bottom first if it has been wet recently. All right, so literally you're just pouring this in there. Again, no other ingredients, just the nuts, and you are going to turn it on. If you have a Vitamix, that is the thing that I am most familiar with using, you don't technically need a tamper. You're gonna turn it on to 1, turn it up to about 5, and then just leave it. You may think that it is not doing anything, but it is, and it's just gonna go by itself. If you have anything else, you may need to use the tamper that came with it. And again, if you're using a food processor, you're going to want to stop every 30 seconds or so and scrape down the sides and continue until you have a creamy peanut butter. Okay, now that we have it to a smooth consistency, we can talk about whether or not we are team crunchy or smooth. If you are team smooth, you are pretty much done at this point. Whether you're using a food processor or a blender, it is going to have very small bits and pieces inside of it, no matter what blender or processor you're using. If you want it even smoother, you can add a touch of oil. It needs to be a super neutral oil. If you are doing peanut butter, I highly suggest that you use a peanut oil. You only need about a half a teaspoon to a full teaspoon, depending on how much you're making. At this point, we can also talk about our add-ins. Again, this literally is just peanuts. We have gotten used to, in our family, eating this just as it is, which is great, and it's a whole reason of why, well, one of the reasons why we like to make our own peanut butter at home is because we control all the ingredients. There's no added oils or salts or sugars or anything like that, and we can customize it in the moment however we want to. But you may like those things, and when we first started making peanut butter, we did add some touches of salt and sugar inside of there until we got used to a more natural flavor of peanut butter or any type of nut butter we're using. So if you want a little bit of salt in there, you really just need a pinch. Again, start very small, add it. You can't really mess it up at this stage, so add a little bit, taste it, add a little bit more, get it to the taste that you want to. If you want to make a vanilla nut butter, this is particularly good if you are using cashews or walnuts. Highly recommend that you use a powder or a vanilla bean versus an extract. You will just get a lot more of that concentrated vanilla flavor, and it will taste so much better. So we will link the vanilla bean powder that we like inside of the description box. You can also add sugar. This is a coconut sugar. I just like the way it tastes in nut butters more so than other things, but you can use any type of brown sugar, or you can even use dates or maple syrup. Again, if you're using a liquid though, it is going to change the consistency slightly. Also, if you're using dates, you may have some of those chunks inside of there, so just keep that in mind. Cinnamon is another great add-in if you want that, especially if you are making like a toast or something. You can even cut this in half. Like, you don't have to make the entire thing one of those things. You can, you know, cut it in half or cut it in quarters and like make different flavors and different ones. And then everybody loves Nutella, but not if you're vegan. It's harder to find. There is a couple of brands now that you can, but you can make your own. You just need about 2 tablespoons of chocolate powder, to 2 cups of whatever nut you are using. So feel free to add in any of these or combination, get creative. We can't wait to see what you make. Speaking of crunchy peanut butter, I wasn't just speaking of crunchy peanut butter, but we're going to right now. If you are team crunchy, leave a comment below if you are team smooth or team crunchy. I guess it's team creamy or crunchy. If you are team crunchy, now I'm gonna combine the two, team crunchy, what you are going to do is you are going to add a little bit more of whatever the nut is that you are using at this point, and you're just going to pulse it. So the point of that is that it really gives you that crunchy consistency that you are used to having in a store-bought one, versus trying to get this to the perfect consistency while you're blending all of them together. Another option, since you are making this at home and maybe you are trying to make it a little bit more healthier, is to add certain types of seeds or nuts, maybe like a chia seed or a pumpkin seed inside of those, to give it a little bit more of a superfood combination, rather than just using all of the same type of nuts. So that is another option that you can do too. Okay, so now that it is done, you have any add-ins that you are adding or just leaving it as is, you are going to pour it into a container. I particularly like glass containers. One, it allows me to see how much I have left. And so you're just going to pour all of your nut butter inside of here. And then what you're gonna do is you're going to cover that with a lid. Try not to spill it onto your counter. You're gonna cover it with a lid. It will be good for 2 weeks inside of a pantry. If you cannot get through how much you make in 2 weeks, you can store it in the fridge for 4 weeks. And then after that, you run the risk of your nuts, especially like something like an almond, going rancid, which just basically means that it's no longer good and then you just wasted it, and we don't really want to do that. So the best thing is, once you get used to making it on your own, you can then adjust how much you're making. So we typically make 2 pounds at a time, and we go through that in 2 weeks. But if you are, you know, on your own, or, you know, you guys, your family doesn't go through a lot of nut butter, then you can just reduce the amount you made. Again, I made a pound of it. You can just make a little bit less. Okay, so we have our nut butter, but what I mentioned earlier is that you can get a special little treat. It is harder to clean a blender than it is a food processor. However, with a blender, you can add some water. I am adding 2 cups of water to my blender. And then you can just pop the lid back on here. And what this is gonna do is it's going to release some of this stuff, that is the nut butter that is stuck around here that is harder to get off. But adding the water is going to turn it into peanut milk. So basically what you get is a 2-for-1. You get your nut butter, but you also get whatever variety of nut that you were using for your nut butter. You get that milk, so a plant-based milk out of it instead. You can use a little bit less water for a more concentrated flavor, or you can keep it at the 2 cups, get a little bit more. It will be a little bit more milder in flavor, but it still tastes great, and your blender gets cleaned in the process. I mean, what's not to love about that, right? Okay, so as you can see, I let this go for 3 minutes. There is nothing really on the sides. You do have a little bit that is up here around the top where it was pouring out. You can't really do anything about that. You will have to clean that part. But for the most part, there's nothing here. So you are going to basically waste none of your nut butter inside of here, but also get something. If you see steam coming off, this is another benefit of the Vitamix, is that it heats things when it goes for that long. So basically have warm nut milk at this point. Obviously you can just let that cool if you don't want to drink it right away as it's warmed. It also gets nice and frothy. That's what's coming out now. And it is so good. If you smell this, it tastes like, it smells better, it smells better than anything that you buy at the store that says that it is a nut milk. The taste is so much better. You will be absolutely amazed. Don't necessarily want to put that on right now while it's still hot. So you get a 2-for-1. You get your nut butter and you get a plant-based milk all at one time, all from just a pound of nuts, whatever you are using to make your combination. So it is absolutely amazing. It is much healthier for you since you control all of the ingredients. I really hope that you enjoyed making this with me. I hope that you are inspired to go out and make your own nut butter, whatever variety that you choose to use. There will be a blog post in the description that gives you a lot of suggestions of what add-ins you can add, how much you should add, what types of nuts you can do, and what types of combinations you should do with the add-ins and the nuts. So I hope you head over to that. It is in the description box so you can get inspired to make your next nut butter. If you do make it, make sure you tag us on Instagram at Make It Dairy Free so we can see it and share with you in your joy of making your own nut butter at home, as well as your new plant-based milk. So I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.